The Associated Press has just broken news regarding Bill Cosby and testimony he gave back in 2005. Now, this is part of his sworn testimony as part of a lawsuit that was filed against him back in 2005. The lawsuit alleged that he had drugged and raped a Temple University employee, an employee at the time. She no longer works there. Now, according to the testimony, Bill Cosby confessed that he had purchased quaaludes. In fact, he had 7 different prescriptions for quaaludes, which were illegal at the time, in order to use them on women that he wanted to have sex with. Again, this is part of testimony that he gave under oath, okay? Oops. He also confessed during that testimony that he had used drugs on the Temple University woman, and he had used drugs on other people, although it is not clear who those other people were. Now, the Associated Press fought very hard in order to get these documents released. Of course, his lawyers fought very hard to ensure that they would not be released because they were concerned that it would embarrass Bill Cosby. It's funny, they're not worried about criminal charges because the statute of limitations is over. But nonetheless, they were worried about him being embarrassed. Now, the judge in this case who had decided that it was right to release the records was Judge Eduardo C. Robredo. And the reason why he did this was because he felt that Bill Cosby is a moralist. He's a person who goes out there and tells people how they should live their lives. And as a result, it's important for these documents to be released to the public. Let me give you his exact statements. Defendant has donned the mantle of public moralist and mounted the proverbial electronic or print soapbox to volunteer his views on, among other things, childbearing, or child rearing, I should say, family life, education, and crime. To the extent that defendant has freely entered the public square and thrust himself into the vortex of these public issues, he has voluntarily narrowed the zone of privacy that he is entitled to this claim.
Yeah. Now, if you were unsure about whether Bill Cosby had drugged women in the past, it appears that the jury has come in on that. So he admitted it under oath. So was he lying back then? And why on God's green earth would you lie about that? Right. Now, why would you lie about doing it to cover it up? Well, that's obvious, right? Because you didn't want to be embarrassed. Forget about all the women you might have hurt through decades of apparently doing this. But my God, you wouldn't want to be embarrassed, right? So the jury's in on Bill Cosby, man, and it is not good news. So it is hard at this point to still sit there and go, I don't know whether he drugged all those women. Maybe he did it just that one time in that Temple case, and through many, many decades, all those dozens of women who didn't know about his sworn testimony under oath that just got released, somehow came up with that same story anyway. Well, if you're in that camp, okay, Mrs. Cosby, whatever you say.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's not just that there were people out there who said, I don't know whether or not he raped these women. Look, he was never criminally charged for any of these rapes. He was never convicted of rape. So for those who are out there saying, I don't know, look, it's a little naive, but I don't begrudge them for that. For those who were upset or angry at the women who came forward and shared their stories, those are the bad people. Because it takes a tremendous amount of courage to come forward and talk about what you allegedly went through, especially when you know that you're going to be demonized for it, especially when you know that this is a very powerful, wealthy man who has a massive fan base. And so those are the kinds of people that discourage other victims from coming forward when they've been raped, when they've been drugged and raped. And also another thing I wanted to point out, you know, according to his testimony, I want to be absolutely clear with all the details to the story. He does not confess to giving the Temple University woman the quaaludes. He says that he gave her 3 half pills of Benadryl. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know.
What a needless lie.
I know.
You got the quaaludes, you got all the quaaludes, you did drug her, but you drugged her a little less than she's claiming. Okay, what an incredible distinction. To the people who are attacking the women, say, oh, well, you know, they never came forward before, and now it's not fair to the guy. And how do you get to determine what's fair and unfair to a woman who's been raped? You know what was unfair? When Bill Cosby raped him. That was pretty unfair.
And didn't face any criminal consequences for it whatsoever.
And by the way, agents and all the people in the entertainment industry that went out of their way to make sure their claims were buried and never got heard, and and said, hey, and intimated and helped Bill Cosby to intimate that they would never work again if they came forward against Bill Cosby, and you're going to talk to them about what they did is unfair, right? Okay, now, you think this information will get through those people? Probably not. Because once they get entrenched in an opinion, no, it's their fault, not Cosby's fault. Okay. Now, finally, to the judge, I totally agree, man. I mean, you're going to go around and you're going to tell us, hey, pull your pants up, and here's what the black community needs to do to take on personal responsibility. Look, I'm not opposed to that. On this program, I've defended that. I think it's a really interesting conversation about how you frame that message, right? And how you talk about it, because you don't want to seem like you're moralizing and that you're better than other people, right? But you do want to help in the different ways, and you can have that in a nuanced, interesting way that is productive, right? But that's not how Bill Cosby did it. He went forward and told everybody personal responsibility. Well, it turns out the chickens have come home to roost. So isn't it time that Bill Cosby took personal responsibility? I mean, if he's admitted this stuff under oath, shouldn't he step forward and say, hey, you know what? I got to pull my pants up here and confess I did it, and maybe report to your local jail and turn yourself in.
That would never happen. But also another thing that I remembered as soon as I read about this update was the fact that he was so angry with that Associated Press reporter who had the audacity to ask him about the more than 24 women who came forward and shared very similar stories of sexual assault or rape. And he was just befuddled by it. Like, he couldn't believe that someone would ask him that question. Of course they're going to ask you that question. More than 24 women have similar stories, and those stories corroborate with the story that we just reported right now, where he confessed to buying drugs with the intention of drugging women to have sex with them.
Yeah. Well, of course, the fake outrage is what has helped to cover up his crimes for all these years. How dare you? He's a pillar of the community, and he's a great representative of African Americans and their success. And so you don't get to ask me about that while he goes and lectures other African Americans about what they did wrong, right? So no, enough of that. Before we knew all this, it was an interesting conversation whether Bill Cosby addressed the issues in the black community in a productive and positive way. It's no longer an interesting conversation. There's no more talk from Bill Cosby about personal responsibility until he shows up at a police headquarters and turns himself in.